It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. It's NFC Championship week. And that means we have Commanders, Eagles to preview. The thing that we've thought all along. Jokes like that are never going to get old, Logan.
Yeah, absolutely. Never going to get old. So here we are talking about the Eagles again for the third time. And we're going to try and bring some new spicy takes on the Eagles as we go. So
Yep. Two teams that have gotten here by doing essentially what they do. What new information could we uncover? I don't know. Let's find out over the next 45 minutes to an hour. All right. We're going to start off with the offense of the Commanders and when Jayden Daniels has the ball. And I do think there's some interesting choices for Vic Fangio to make. And because we have 2 games worth of data, we've actually seen him make both choices this year. And surprisingly, after choice 1 worked the first time, they didn't do it again in game 2. They tried to mix it up and it did not go as well. That choice, Logan, is they pressured Jayden Daniels, the lowest that anybody did all season in their Week 11 matchup. The Eagles then had their second highest blitz rate of the season for them in Week 16 against Jayden. In the first one, didn't really do a whole lot offensively, did Washington. In the second one, Jayden threw 5 touchdown passes. So it might seem that they might not blitz a whole lot, but also teams can't stop blitzing Jayden, even though he's great against it. What do we think happens on Sunday on that side of the ball?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because like even when they do pressure, it's not like they're not like crazy pressures. I think when you think of like blitzing, people think of like Detroit or Tampa Bay, and probably because of the teams who've played most recently, Philly is kind of pressuring in a little bit more conservative of a manner. Like it's all sim pressures. It's all like they occasionally rush 6, but that's usually on rundowns, like as a way to stop the run, kind of build a run structure. But like when they're rushing the passer, they're just trying to get to like a 4-man overload, right? So they're just trying to bring one and then one extra, and then they're usually dropping someone out. So it's like true zone 4-man pressures. So like even those pressures, even though they seem, it sounds like Philadelphia was being very aggressive. I thought it was just a nice way for them to get to different rush patterns. And when you go back and watch the first half of the second game, it really befuddled Washington in a way that was kind of unexpected. Like they had a really hard time picking it up and some of the empty protections and things like that. So what I would say is I'd expect there to be a mix of both. I think they take the things that worked in the second game and also the things that worked in the first game. And ultimately what I think is that you probably say, we want to, as Philadelphia, rush for play coverage, whether that's man, quarters, match, whatever it is, probably a little bit more man. They've played more man the back half of the year, right? And just say, we will throw the changeup of these zone pressures, which were very effective. We're just going to be a little bit more selective about when they do them. And so if that's the case, I think that makes it a little bit harder to prep because, you know, one of the things about Jayden Daniels and this offense and Cliff Kingsbury is if you get like a good feel and a good bead. So for example, like when we were talking in our production meeting, it was like, if they're playing a lot of man and rushing 4, what's the plan? It's like, right. I'm going to send the protection to Jalen Carter. I'm going to make sure there's even chip help maybe on Jalen Carter with the back or whatever we're going to do. I'm going to kind of say the tackles, you're on your own. We're going to really focus on him as someone we need to protect. And then I'm going to run a lot of man-beating concepts that get the ball out quickly, right? However, if they start bringing some of this sim, 4-man rush, 4-man overload pressure, that we're going to play a little bit more zone behind it, that becomes a little bit more complicated to do. And so I think you'll probably see a mix of both just because I think it's good defense. Take what worked well. Don't overexpose yourself, right? Because I think that's something we were talking about is maybe they overexposed themselves in the second matchup while also bringing that conservative, solid approach that you had in the first one.
So the Eagles have gotten pressure on over half of their blitzes against Daniels this season, 52.4%, but came away with just 1 sack. So despite the pressure, Daniels has taken advantage of the less coverage defenders by completing 11 of 17 passes against the blitz for 193 yards and 3 touchdowns per next-gen stats. So I think the thing with him, the more I think about it, the more I watch, the more I talk to people, is he just has like a supernatural spatial awareness. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily that he's and I'm not saying this verbatim, like this is how he processes it, but this is kind of how I watch it, right? It's not even that he's like reading the coverage. It's just like, oh, there's space. Like he just has an ability to see space as a runner and certainly as a passer where it's like, oh, that blitzer's coming. There's space behind. I know my route concept. I'm about to have a guy sit down right there. I'm going to fire the ball to him. And he just seems to have like a supernatural awareness of where, almost like he has a heat map of the field and he can see where the gaps are. And when you take defenders out of coverage, then he can find that extra space with a regularity that's, amongst the best in the NFL, period. Nevertheless, for a rookie, nevertheless, for a guy who can also hurt you with his legs. So I think that's the conundrum is, in week 1, they just didn't do that. Or week 11, I should say, they didn't do that. 12.5% blitz rate. So they had 7 in coverage all the time. And in week 16, 35%. And that's just too many opportunities for him, man or zone, to find where that extra space is and where he should be distributing the football.
Yeah, and it's funny when you look at the second matchup, I actually thought the Philadelphia Eagles defense did a good job outside of like 4 plays. Remember there's the explosive play to Diami, there's the explosive play to Terry, there's the explosive play to OZ. And those things are traditionally not stuff that the Philadelphia Eagles defense gives up. But like one of the things that happened in that game is Jayden Daniels would break the pocket or extend or mess up the timing with the type of arc that he was putting on the football. I think we talked about that in the review show. Like he's putting these balls out there, like with tremendous arc, tremendous timing, letting the receivers run under it. And I just wonder how repeatable that is. And I wonder if you're Vic Fangio, are you worried about that? Or are you just like saying like, he's not going to do this again? Because again, those are relatively low percentage throws. Like there's a ton of variance in those kind of deep down the field shots. A lot of defenses kind of encourage you to take those shots because they are so low percentage. And then you say like, well, he got the explosive play to OZ where he broke contain and they had 12 men on the field. They ran the man coverage player off the field that had OZ and it led to an explosive play. So I kind of wonder if they kind of say like that's the anomaly in this and we just got to do what we do well, kind of what you're saying, and just stick with the things that we did so well in the week 11 matchup. Because again, this defense is very, very good. And, they are a little bit banged up in the secondary. Quinyon Mitchell's on the injury report this week, so that'll be interesting if they feel like they have to be more aggressive if he's out of the lineup. But, again, like they just do so much well, the Philadelphia defense, that I'm kind of like maybe that was an anomaly from an offensive performance for Washington, and they just kind of say, hey, we're going to throw the fastball right down the middle and see if you can hit it.
I definitely think that's possible. I mean, Vic Fangio's been one of the best DCs in this league for a long, long time. And if he's like, I trust my stuff, I'm going to do it, especially with the talent he's got, I think it's hard to argue. The problem is there's a next-gen stat for this too. Daniel's completing 52.2% of his passes when targeting vertical routes this season, 5th highest in the NFL, highest mark by a rookie since 2018. But here's the kicker in terms of, is this an anomaly on these bigger vertical routes? I know not all of the big plays they hit were verticals.
Anomaly is not. It's like, statistical. I'm calling statistical variance. At some point, is it going to regress, right? Yeah. Okay.
So Daniels led the league with 14.6 yards per attempt on such passes, throwing 12 touchdowns, including 4 in Week 16 against the Eagles, and only 3 picks. Yeah. So it would tell you that you can take that bet on statistical variance, but it's not the 50-50 or even more tilted in the defense's favor that it would be against most quarterbacks. So I think that, ultimately, like I had a great conversation with Robert yesterday on the radio show. And there's 2 things that he said that I thought were really, really smart on this. One, I think that when we talk about man coverage against mobile quarterbacks, there's this notion, this thought that you can't do it because our eyes are on the receivers and it's going to open up run lanes. And he said the numbers don't actually bear that out. Scrambling quarterbacks will hurt you just as evenly against zone as they do against man. So the idea that like we can't play man against Jayden Daniels is silly because of that reason. Now maybe there's other reasons you don't want to. The numbers would say that's actually incorrect, that he'll destroy zones at a much higher rate. The other part of that is if you look at just the roster construction of Washington's offense, I would make the receiving talent beat me. And maybe that's a more difficult proposition now that De'Ami Brown has discovered a new level. But I would, if I was Philly, I would be willing to take that bet and challenge that. Jameson is very skilled in a very specific set of things, but OZ, same thing. But these guys are not the best receivers in football who crush man-to-man coverage. They're great zone receivers who have a good feel, can get down, find the space, make guys miss after the catch. But you got to get open first against man. And so I just tend to think that they should lean maybe the heaviest. They've been playing a lot more man second half of the season.
It's like 60%, right? Or something like that. It's like
that quarter's match has gone straight man. in a lot of situations. And so it's something they're comfortable doing. It has been the Achilles heel of Washington's offense. Last week against Detroit, just a 41% success rate on dropbacks where it's 4 or 5 man pressures and man coverage on the back end. Like, I think you kind of have to make them beat you that way. And then it comes to the question of, can Jayden do it? And I think he can, but it's the hardest way for him to play.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I think back to, again, I've referenced this before, but Pittsburgh played them that way, and it's not like he wasn't seeing it effectively. It's the throws were just a touch off. You know what I mean? They're just a touch off, and that was kind of with the rib injury. And then you look at the Philly game, and again, the rib injury is still a common thread here. But like, he was seeing it well. The throws were into such tight windows. Then you look at the third game with Philly. So I'm kind of looking at these 3 games as case studies. And in the first half, I actually thought, man, like, that's a really good throw on a tight window dig with a man coverage player. It wasn't man, but like, he's matching the dig. It's a tight window throw, and the ball gets dropped. Or here's a slant, tight window, ball gets dropped. And so there is an element to, like, he sees it okay, but the ball just isn't completed at a super high percentage the way it is in these other coverage structures that you're seeing. So I think maybe that's the point here and it's not only, this is the other thing I think you brought up a good point. Like, you want him to play man coverage. And again, the Washington receivers aren't the best at consistently beating man coverage. Like, they're a good group. They've punched above their weight class. Terry McLaurin's done a great job. Diami's resurgence is amazing, all those things. But I also think the thing about Philly that makes them so effective is the rush coupled with the coverage is something that is very unique to them. They've got a lot of guys that can win one-on-ones. Williams and Carter on the interior do a great job when you watch them. They push the pocket at a really high level. Nolan Smith's playing a lot better. Sweat's playing well. The Jalix Hunt, I think is the guy's name, number 58 for them, is starting to play better on the perimeter and create consistent pressure. He's kind of this power, strong build rusher. And I'm like, man, that's the thing that becomes problematic is dudes will get open, but the rush has been so consistent for them. Like, they don't really have to blitz. They do sometimes, obviously, but like, that's the thing that makes that defense good. It's like they're the gatekeepers for the coverage. Like, they basically are like, you will not have to cover longer than 1.7 seconds because one of us is going to win. And that shows up pretty consistently when you watch them on film. And it's not, maybe it doesn't show up in pressure rates, but the way they affect the passer is very, very high. And I was talking to Dan Quinn about this at the beginning of the season. He's like, sometimes our pressure rate is different than like the NFL or Pro Football Focus pressure rate because, like, let's say you bull the guard back into the quarterback's lap, like, that's affecting his process in terms of throwing. And we count that as a pressure, even though, like, you're not on the other side of the guard, and that would be technically a pressure by PFF's metric. So I think that's really another story for me that is somewhat compelling. I think the coverage structure is a big deal, but like, again, in the second matchup when they were blitzing a little bit, like, he was finding the open guy. He just couldn't deliver the ball because the rush was so aggressive. And so I think that's, to me, another huge story, especially with Sam Cosmi out. Like, how do you kind of balance all that?
Yeah, I think we're going to get to that in 10 seconds. But I think the other thing, too, that's, about Jayden is speeding him up isn't necessarily the best way to get the worst out of him if you're a defense because he sees it so quick. It's almost like, can you slow him down and have him sit back there and get kind of antsy in the pocket and feel like he should be running or he should be having the ball out? That's when he sometimes takes some sacks or, gets a little greedy. So I think that's something to watch too. With like, how much do they aggressively rush and how much do they mush rush with 4 or with more?
Well, it's like the second interception that he had against Philly, right? He gets flushed, he's holding on the ball, he's trying to make a play, throws the ball late over the middle of the field, and he doesn't do that a lot, right? He's been very, very good about not turning the football over, but he is a human being and he does make mistakes, and I felt like that was a good example of where it's like, they kind of, it wasn't a mush rush necessarily, but they kind of flushed him from the pocket. He's trying to make a play, makes a bad decision. So I think that's another element too, is like, what kind of game flow is this going to be for the offense? And can you be a little bit more conservative? Do you see some more punts in this game than we have from Dan Quinn? Because the Philly offense doesn't really put the screws to you the same way Detroit does. They're a little bit, it's a slower paced game. It's like, it's a very 1980s style of football. It's like, we're going to play great defense, and they consistently play great defense, and we're going to run the ball. And we're going to shorten the game. We're going to win by one possession. And so, like, do you feel the same urgency to, like, maximize every possession the way they did versus Detroit? I don't know. I would.
I want to make this game a track meet.
I know, I think that's right, but I think like, so for example, like let's say you're on the 50-yard line, right? Is it because you know that you're not going to get lapped the same way by the offense? Like, do you just punt it? I agree. You want to come out and score. I just saw a crazy statistic. And since the last game, which I think was week 16? When did they play them last? Week 16?
Yeah, week 16.
Philly's only trailed for 5 minutes. 5 minutes in all those games. That's including the playoffs. They are used to winning a very specific type of game. They don't play from behind. They play with a lead. They lean on their defense. They lean on the run game. Jalen Hurts is way deleveraged right now in the offense, and that's how they win games. So if, to your point, if you can get out and put them in a 7-point deficit, like what happens? Do they just try to throw the ball over the yard and they can't operate in the game flow that they want? So I think that's a really interesting element too in terms of how aggressive you are offensively and the messaging you give to Jayden Daniels, because maybe it's like, hey, we don't need to be hyper aggressive like we were against Detroit, but that's the thing that's kind of got you to this point as an offense and as a team, is that you are very aggressive. So I think there are some really interesting storylines from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, Commanders averaging 34 a game in the playoffs. Philly's giving up 16 a game in the playoffs. So two very contrasting styles on this side of the ball.
16? Man.
16 points per game in the playoffs. So we mentioned the offensive line. No Sam Cosmi, huge bummer. Sucks so much for Sam, who's been such a great player for this team through a bunch of bad years, and now was having a great year this year as he continued on with Washington. And obviously, thank God he got the extension on a personal level. Like, gets that money. Probably feels a little bit better about this, although I'm sure he's not psyched. Obviously, long road to recovery ahead. But what do the Commanders do at that spot? I think a lot of folks probably just anticipate Trent Scott taking over because that's what happened in the game. But Chris Paul was inactive. You got him as a backup guard. You got Michael Dieter. You could move some things around and put Cornelius Lucas, who's probably your 6th best offensive lineman, at tackle, and then bump Andrew Wiley or Brandon Coleman inside. I would think Wiley probably as the veteran would be the one to do that. But there's options here, Logan. What are the merits of? Let's start with just the generic 1-for-1 sub versus getting, quote unquote, your best 5 on the field and putting Cornelius Lucas out there and bumping one of the tackles inside.
Yeah, I think this is the 1-for-1 sub thing's interesting because, again, it's like you're just moving one piece. So all the 4 other elements kind of stay the same. So, I know Chris Paul's made it into the discussion in some circles. Like if Chris Paul or Trent Scott were to play guard, you're only moving one piece. So Wiley stays the same. All his rules stay the same. His pass protection rules stay the same. And, Biotish is right next to you, so you can kind of get everything worked out and sorted. So I tend to lean that way, right? I tend to think that's the easier lift because, again, everyone maintains their same roles. Corn is the swing tackle, Trent or whoever is in there, and then you have the swing guy back up all the spots. So there's not a really dramatic shift in roles and positions. And I think that's what a lot of coaches tend to do. Now, if you're playing Madden, for example, and you just look at the ratings and you say, oh, well, Andrew Wiley's a better guard, Cornelius Lucas is a better tackle, like let's move them in there and make that shuffle. I understand like objectively why you would do that. Again, from a Madden standpoint, it makes 100% sense. Get your best 5 on the field. However, you are taking a guy who hasn't played a lot of guard this year, and he may have repped it in practice, and this is where like we would defer to the coaches because they're repping the guys in practice. They know what they've done over the course of the season. Right. But you put Wiley at guard, and then you put Cornelius Lucas at tackle. And again, on paper, that's probably your best 5, but you are moving 2 people. And Corn's played a lot of tackle here, and he's done a really nice job. And Wiley's done a great job too. However, when you mix them together, how many reps have they had together? How many times has he played this? What do the combinations look like? What's the communication like? So that makes me a little bit more nervous just from a pure coaching standpoint. At the high school level, I've done both. They both make me nervous, right? But because again, I remember this is a year ago, we put our best offensive lineman at guard because we had a matchup issue we were worried about. And he had probably 7 mental mistakes on the first drive. And it's high school, it's different, but that's the extreme version of what we're talking about. You're just putting a guy in a position that he hasn't been in a ton. So all the differences in alignment, all the pressures, all the rules for the guard, is he super locked in on? I don't know. So that's where it's I'd probably just say, hey, Trent Scott or Chris Paul did a great job. Let's stick with that. And then if something happens in the game, maybe we make an adjustment.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I think the one thing that I would also be considering is that spot, right guard, is over left defensive end, which is typically where Jalen Carter lines up. Now, it's not, he'll switch between the two spots, playing that 3 technique or whatever other versions of the shades and stuff that he does. But man, making sure that you have one of your best guys over that guy is really important. I think the other thing is when you build a line, you can have a relative weak spot on one side because you can then send help. You can chip on one side if one of your tackles maybe has a weakness in pass protection. The Commanders have actually chipped both this year with regularity and done a great job of it. It's kind of been a masterclass on that by Cliff. But if you have Sam Cosmi at right guard, you can be like, all right, well, our center can help Nick Allegretti most of the time. Mm-hmm. That's not the case anymore. Yeah. Now you don't have Sam Cosmi at right guard. So I do wonder as well of especially with the matchup of Jalen Carter being as quick as he is, does a guy like Wiley, when we get into the specific guys and the quickness and athleticism that he has, is that more appealing than the power player of Chris Paul? Or, what do you consider Trent Scott? Because I think he's got some good athleticism. It's mediocre maybe for a tackle, but it's pretty darn good for a guard. Does he have the strength that sometimes he struggles with a tackle to play inside against Jalen Carter, who's a monster? So I think these are the questions they're probably considering. Do you have any specific thoughts on those facets?
I guess what I'd say is, I remember Chris Paul in his first start did a great job against Fletcher Cox. Really moved him off the spot, was very physical. But Chris Paul is a power player. Fletcher Cox is a power player, right? Jalen Carter's a different animal, right? He's strong, he's quick, he's explosive. I mean, he's the closest thing to Aaron Donald, since Aaron Donald, or Chris Jones, like that kind of guy in terms of his ability to disrupt. So what I would say is no matter who you put in there, they're going to have a hard time. Pro Bowl guard, whoever, like Sam Cosmi had a hard time with him, right? And he's one of the best players in football at the position. So what I would say, it's got to be a schematic, point of emphasis, no matter who's playing, right? So you mentioned, sending the center. I think about to the old game plans, the old protection plans when Aaron Donald was playing, and it was where is he? Slide's always going that way unless we get this look, and then we're going to go here. Then you're going to be on your own. If that is the case, and the back's to your side, we're not taking a outside release. We're not going outside the tackle. We're chipping the outside shoulder of the guard, so he has help. So guard, if you're on this side, the back's coming. Don't take a wide set. You know what I mean? And it was literally all hands on deck. And so I think that's what it's got to be. I think in the run game too, it was he doesn't like to take on these types of blocks. He's still good at it, but let's make him do that a bunch. If we got to sift him, we got to crack him. If we got to make sure there's a double team on him. For example, they run a lot of bounce, right, with that back block. I might make it a tackle pull this week so we could just sink the double on the 3 technique, and then the tackle can pull, and it might slow down the footwork for the back, but at least we're not getting crazy penetration up the field, right? And that's a slight augmentation where that guard's got to really be on it, right? Got to kind of ricochet the 3 and get out and block the end man, all that kind of stuff. But that's, quite frankly, how good he is. And even when Sam's in there, he gives you a fighting chance. But now with this kind of rotation, that to me is maybe, in addition to the man versus zone coverage that Vic Fangio is going to play, this is the sub storyline. This is the next one. And to me, Cliff's done a great job all year. You mentioned of chipping and helping on the perimeter. But, in the game plan show that I do with Dan Quinn, he's always you can help on an edge rusher. It's really hard to help on an interior player. And so that's where the schematic lift of this thing becomes so much more problematic. And you think about the great defensive players over the last, 15 years, Aaron Donald, TJ Watt, Chris Jones, TJ Watt. No, JJ Watt. JJ Watt. And then Chris Jones, one of the reasons they're so good is they can play 3 technique, they can play shade, they can play defensive end, and Jalen Carter brings that same versatility and can really challenge your attempts to stop him. So I think that's the next storyline is who they put in, who ends up playing, and then how they help that person deal with one of the best defensive linemen in football.
I remember Jason Kelsey telling a story on his podcast on New Heights about playing Aaron Donald, and the Eagles, who obviously have one of the best O-lines in the league, Jeff Statland, legendary O-line coach, their rule was every single snap you double Aaron Donald. Yeah. No, there are no exceptions. Every single snap we were doubling Aaron Donald, and the only thing that you had to. And sorry to cut you off, and the great thing about Jason Kelsey is he would actually pull to Aaron Donald. So let's say he was a wide 5, he would snap the ball, pull, and then kind of line up almost
double on the guard. And that's how they did it for years. And it worked really, really well. And again, they have really good guards that can handle that one-on-one matchup pretty well. But that's how disruptive, like that's a new protection. No one does that. Sometimes you'll pull if they bring 4 and you're late, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But every time he's snapping, and where is he? And it's how he gets that double team was really interesting. But yeah, it's crazy.
Well, the funny thing was they had no exceptions. The only thing they had to track was whether 98 was on the field or 99. What 99, number did he? 99 was on the field. And one time Jason missed it. And Landon Dickerson was like, bro, what the hell was that? And he's like, oh, sorry, I didn't see he was there. And he felt so bad because he just left Landon Dickerson, I think it was, on an island against Aaron Donald one-on-one, which was not supposed to happen. But they survived the down and kept it moving. Another way that you can stifle a pass rush and a disruptive player is being effective in the run game. And the Commanders were very much not on the running back design run game in their Week 16 matchup. It was their worst rushing game of the season. They had a success rate in the 20s on their design running back runs. They, on average, were negative yards before contact. It was a terrible, terrible day on the ground, which I don't say to beat up on them. It's just to try to capture. It was actually statistically the worst one they had all year. Now, the Commanders last week rediscovered their run game, and part of the way they did it was using some interesting formational stuff and some interesting personnel stuff. Commanders used 10 personnel, 1 running back, no tight ends, on 7 plays in their divisional round. That's one more than they had used all season prior, Logan. They had 6 snaps week 1 through wildcard weekend. They had 7 in 10 personnel last week, including design runs on 6 of those 7 plays, resulting in 63 yards and 2 explosive gains. So is there something that you can do if you're Cliff with personnel and or formation that can maybe help the run game this week? And try to have some success to supplement Jayden Daniels and give Jalen Carter and friends some more to think about.
Yeah. So one thing is I feel like that 10 personnel came when Zach was out getting evaluated for a concussion. I think all 7 of the snaps came when Zach was out. And that makes sense, right? Because Zach's basically like, he's got that receiving skill set. We want to make sure we keep that flexibility for the pass catchers on the field. So again, if something happens to Zach, I see them getting in that 10 personnel quite a bit. I think, so this is I'm really glad you brought this up, because this is a really interesting kind of X's and O's element to what makes Philly good. So one of the things about Detroit is they do a good job of kind of getting in, like when I'm in the wide bunch, they like apex the linebacker, blah, blah, blah. And you'll see Philly do something similar. Like Vic Fangio, like one of the things he does, he always wants to be plus in coverage, right? And, you know, Alabama does this a ton, and Nick Saban's well renowned for this. And like, this is like the new wave of defense, all that kind of stuff. The thing is, the front for the Eagles is so good in one-on-one situations that you can get away with it if you're them. And like you think about in those games that we just talked about, the last game, for example, it's not like they're playing, you know, crazy 8-man box and this guy's fitting the run. It's like you got Williams, Davis, Carter, and Davis is just eating double teams. He's not moving off the spot. He's taking 2 defenders. They can't get to the linebacker.
And by the way, he got hurt in that game. And the
that's right.
success in Week 16 was definitely a little bit better after.
That's right. After he left the game, right? And again, like that's like, you know, you can talk about his value at a pick in, what was he, 11 or 16, wherever he was in the draft, but you know, like his value to the defense is palpable. You can see it, right? Because he can hold the point. Williams is a great penetrator. He splits double teams at a high level. That frees up Zach Bond to just basically run and get to the football. So it's a different animal than it was versus Detroit, where I felt really comfortable about all the offensive linemen in one-on-one or in double team situations. This is different. You can get in a 6-man surface, and it can be 6 versus 6 plus the back. Usually that favors the offense. And consistently, we talked about what they do as pass rushers, but consistently they win that matchup. And that's where it's like, you really got to get in the pen and be like, how do we, again, they had some success with whams and traps, but I've gushed over Zach Bond all year. Like, I have not seen a better linebacker in probably 3 years of covering the team. He reminds me a lot of like Luke Kuechly in terms of like his speed. Again, there's an intellectual element that's still developing for him, but his speed and
because this is his first year playing inside linebacker.
Correct.
Insane.
Correct. But his speed to the ball is tremendous, right? And he's covered up, so he can be fast to the football, and he gives them a ton of flexibility. And his ability to get from a box like in the box as a run fit player to underneath the deep dig is just incredible. So they're just much better in the front. Like, and it's going to present some issues. So you can spread them out, you can find those one-on-ones, but it's not going to hit quite the same way because you've got these guys on the interior. Then you've got good edge players. Like people look at Nolan Smith, they think he's a small player. He sets tremendous vertical edges in the run game. He is strong as an ox, really, for being 240 pounds. Like he snaps people's heads back. And so they've got all these guys that can rush the passer, and it's really a testament to their roster construction. They've just found dudes that can do both at a very high level and are very disruptive, and it lets them play these coverage structures and not really worry about the run. I made this analogy, like I was talking to Sam Fortier. It's like they're the bouncers. Like that front four, they're the bouncer, and they let everything else, like in the club, the coverage structure, like operate the way it needs to operate. So from a run standpoint, they handle it. From a pass rush standpoint, they handle it. And the coverage can be what it wants to be, and it gives Vic Fangio this tremendous flexibility. And that's where it's not going to be the same. It's going to be tough sledding, and you got to be a little bit creative with the run design, I think.
Yeah, they ran that beautiful QB trap the first time around. Yes. Can they get some of the quarterback stuff going? Can they find something? I think, so I actually went back and watched it didn't take very long, every single 10-plus yard run the Eagles gave up this year. They gave up only 45 of them. One of them was a fake punt, so that doesn't count. That's a 44. That's 44. A couple of Lamar scrambles in there. We're talking about like 40-ish runs. And I will say, well, 3 of them also were on the first drive of the season they had against Green Bay, which is hilarious, including a 33-yard touchdown reverse by Jayden Reed. But I think the one common thread amongst them was when they were in 4-down structures. So can you get them out of their base defense? Yeah, can you get it with 4 down? And then there was at least a couple that I remember that are over Josh Sweat. And he's such a penetrator. Sometimes he'll take himself out of the play. So can you use some of this aggressive, penetrating tactics that they have against them? They obviously did that with some of the traps and whams and things in that second matchup. But all in all, it is really, really hard to run on this team. And getting big, explosive plays like they got last time doesn't seem like it's in the cards. But maybe they can get the screen game going with some of these formations or something like that, because you're going to have to find it some way, somehow to make this the track meet that you want to if you're Cliff Kingsbury. Take Command Podcast. Craig Hoffman here. Logan Paulson there, talking about the Commanders and Eagles NFC Championship game showdown. And man, this is going to be an interesting side of the ball when Philadelphia has it, Logan, to see what this Washington Commanders defense can do, specifically against Saquon Barkley. And I hate to say it just comes down to whether or not they can stop Saquon Barkley, but it kind of feels like this game might just come down to whether or not the Commanders can stop Saquon Barkley.
Yes, and it does feel a little bit derivative, a little bit oversimplified. You know me, I like to make everything super complicated, but it does really feel like when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles offense over the last couple of weeks, like Jalen Hurts hasn't been playing great. It's not like he's playing bad, but he's definitely not elevating the offense the way he was. And I think that was 2022. Was that when they went to the Super Bowl, right? Yeah. He's playing like at an MVP caliber level, and he looks like that guy. He's not playing that same way. Like when you watch the Green Bay game, like he makes some nice throws, but it's all kind of flat. There's nothing really down the field. The chemistry with AJ Brown seems off. He's taking a lot of sacks that he shouldn't take, right? It's just there's something off. Like he's not seeing it super well. And so really the explosive elements of their offense come from their offensive line, their tight ends, and the running back. And obviously everyone's well familiarized with Saquon and what he can do. And so he's the one that's turned the games the last 3 or 4 games that they've played. He's really been the difference maker. And again, that's why you bring in that special talent. We saw it last week with Jahmyr Gibbs. We saw it in San Francisco with Christian McCaffrey, how a great runner behind a good offensive line really just takes your offense to a totally different level. And
this guy's a great runner behind a great offensive line.
And again, this is I'm going to like kind of put my scouting hat on. Like he's not a great consistent like down to down, like there's better down to down runners, you know what I mean? Like you think about, I don't know, like Bijan Robinson or Derrick Henry's more consistent. David Montgomery's probably more consistent down to down in terms of making a badly blocked run into a positive gain. But all of that kind of nuance and subtlety is totally erased because he's the most explosive runner in football right now. I just heard a crazy statistic on the Mina Kimes show. He accounts for 20% of the NFL's explosive runs. 20% Saquon Barkley, right? I think there's been like, I forget the exact statistic, but it's like there's 8 runs over 60 yards this year. He accounts for 7 of them. Like, he's just a stick of dynamite in the backfield. And we knew that when he was coming out of Penn State, and it's great to see him have this level of production. But like, really, that's what it comes down to. So to me, like, my oversimplified version of this is like, play an 8-man box, play cover 3, play some type of man, and just be like, Jalen Hurts, we dare you. Like, we dare you to beat us. Or, Coach Moore, like, call something different, because we are not going to let him be the difference maker. The problem is they're going to give it to him 25 to 35 times in the game. So can you be that consistent? And we've seen this team do some pretty impressive stuff, specifically in this playoff run. Like, I think about the way they played Tampa Bay, the way they played Bucky Irving, how physical they were in the front. They've shown an ability to do it. The second half of the Philly game, like I went back and watched it. I was like, man, these guys are playing great run defense, really fantastic run defense. But can you do it for 4 quarters? And obviously they haven't really put it together that way. And no one's been able to stop him for 4 quarters. And I give a lot of credit to, again, their personnel department. They found just mammoths of human beings. You go down the line, Jordan Mailata's every bit of 380. Landon Dickerson's like 350. Cam Jurgens is obviously undersigned, but Mekhi Becton is 375. And then Lane Johnson's maybe the top 3 offensive linemen in football, and he's 320. They just wear you out. And versus a front like Washington that's a little undersized, little, like good athletes, all that kind of stuff, like that to me is the biggest concern, because they're going to lean on you. You'll beat him a couple times. You'll give up some negative runs, because he'll take a negative run, Saquon, now. But you can't do it for 4 quarters. And eventually, like, he'll hit a big one and his rushing efficiency totally changes. So that's the story to me, is can you keep him in the box?
For sure. And I think a couple of things off of that. First of all, just more illuminating on the explosive nature and how unique he is. He had 11 runs this year where he hit 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Next closest guy is 5. Yeah. More than double. It's Derrick Henry. By the way, you know who led the NFL in 15 mile an hour plus runs this year?
I don't know.
Jayden Daniels.
Oh, look at that guy.
Yeah, just was doing a little sort by column deal, and I was like, oh, look who's at the top of this column. That would be Jayden Daniels, Saquon's 3rd. But Saquon, 11 rushes of over 20 miles per hour, and he is by far and away the leader in the league in that. I think the other thing that's really interesting, and I thought they did a good job on the broadcast of talking about this a little bit last week, and some other of the podcasts I listened to, I think it was Mays and Klassen talked about this on their show, is a lot of teams, when they're trying to stop a running back, we're like, we got to crowd the line, like we got to get bodies up there, like we got to be instant. And that is a double-edged sword against Saquon, because if you bring your second level down to the first level, and your first level now it just gets blocked up, there's no one there on the second level. So when you think of all the different options that Washington has with how they deploy their nickel personnel, which is what they're in the most, right? And where they can put Chin in terms of an 8th man in the box, whether it is the odd fronts that they use with Luvu and Fowler on the edge. Are there any of those that are particularly good ideas, or potentially even particularly bad ideas because of the risk factor of not having guys deeper on the field, which sounds counterintuitive to stopping the run, but might be the best way to stop Saquon, because he is so explosive, and if there is room for him to get out, that is actually more dangerous than him just getting to the line of scrimmage in the first place.
Yeah, and I don't think there's like a right answer to this, but what I will say is Washington seems to be a little bit better when they're in their odd front, just a little bit better. I do think they are better when they have their bigger bodies in. I think we talked a little bit about Daron Payne playing defensive end. I keep wanting to call him Christian Holmes, but I know that's not right. Holmes, number 96. Jalen Holmes, yes. He does a great job setting an edge and playing with length, and can match up with these tackles really well. I think you see Jazan playing a little bit better versus the run. Daron and John, that's been really nice to have them both back, because they've done a great job. Sheldon Day actually was dominant in the second Philadelphia game, the one at home. He really did a fantastic job, and we haven't seen that same level of consistency from him, but it's obviously in the bag. So the thing that I noticed that Washington did much better in the second half of the first game is they got a little bit tighter to the line of scrimmage, and I'm saying like linebacker depth, right? You're not fitting from like a quarters position 12 yards off. And they did a really good job of gap control. And that to me is when you watch Saquon, it's you got to control your gap. And I know for all you high school coaches out there, like that's day one stuff. But like when you watch him versus Green Bay, like they're running a duo. It's like the 5th play of the game or something like that. And he presses in the line of scrimmage. The linebacker does not step up into the line of scrimmage. He's really slow. Like he stays at 5 yards. Mekhi Becton gets up on him. He presses the hole, and everybody to the defensive left plays to, I guess, the offensive right of the block. They all play across. So they're all vacating their gap to go try and tackle Saquon. Saquon just bounces it back to that side, and no one's over there because they've all lost gap control and broken it for a big gain. So when I say gap control, like you need to be crazy disciplined, right? I need to get extension, sit in my gap. I need to trust that the person who's supposed to fit the gap next to me is going to fit it. Because if I vacate to make the tackle, he's going to find it and it's going to be an explosive run. I think you saw it in the first game. I think I'm trying to remember. It was the long run. It was like a bounce, right? There was a slight misfit by the front side defensive end there running a line stunt. So he went 2 gaps instead of 1. And ends up being an explosive play because you're just out of a gap by a little bit. So that's where it's like, I think the linebacker level stuff, because like later in the game, in that game, for example, Washington runs a duo. Everyone's in gap control. Quan does a great job coming down, peeling the double team. And then Cleveland Farrell's on the edge and is able to throw down the tight end and make a tackle for a loss. So it's the secondary players fitting. It's the corners fitting runs. Like you see that all the time when you watch him on his explosive runs. The corners are late to fit the run. Because, like on duo is a great example of this. Like everything that the runner is supposed to do or the defense is designed to do, the offense is designing to do is to get them to the corner. And if the corner's slow to the fit, like he's going to break it for an explosive gain. So it's really, you say this all the time, it takes 11 guys doing exactly what they're supposed to do in the defense that's called. And the problem that you see when you guys break and bust these long runs is like, for example, on the one that the defensive end misfitted in the second game where Saquon has that long explosive run. Mike Sanderstill is supposed to be the fit. He's supposed to come down and fit because the receiver has now cracked the safety. He's got to come down and be the D-gap run defender. He thinks it's a pass. So he's running across with the cracker like it's a pass, and Saquon breaks out. So it becomes hard for those secondary guys because they are of two minds, right? It's like I have to be in the run fit, but also I've got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith out here, and I got to make sure I handle that. So it's hard. It's hard to do it for 4 quarters versus an offense like this versus a player like this. And so it's really like it's got to be a point of emphasis, and you just got to hope you're tackling well and you've got great gap control and you're aggressive to your run fit. And that comes with consequences as well.
Easy said, hard done.
Yeah.
Dan had a great quote on Wednesday, Dan Quinn. He was just like, we can't get bored with doing the simple stuff. Like we have to be just laser focused discipline on the gap control and all that kind of stuff. I pulled up the next gen stats insights for the Eagles here, and the first 4 across are just all Saquon being historically great and specifically historically great against the Commanders. And I don't feel like I need to read these because he's been very good against Washington, and he's been unbelievable this season. So hopefully they can turn the tide on Sunday if they can force Jaylen to be a passer a little bit, whether that's by game script, whether that's looks that they throw. Just, hey, we're going to put 8 in the box and we're going to dare you to throw it. And typically Jaylen will say, okay, well, if you're going to play one-on-one on the outside on A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, then we're gonna go. By the way, it's worth mentioning that as we record this Thursday morning, Dallas Goedert was out of Wednesday's practice, so there's definitely a chance he would miss Sunday. That's a big weapon for them, and we see what he's been able to do after the catch, especially that sick run he had in the Green Bay game. But I think one of the other things to watch here is how Joe deploys the secondary. Is he in man? Is he in zone? Is Sainer still just the right corner or the left cornerback and Lattimore on the right? Do they shadow again with Lattimore and A.J. Brown like they did in the first matchup where Marshawn was on the wrong end of some bad flags? I think this is they've got some interesting choices to make there. And I don't know what the best one is. That's probably why it's their job, not mine. I just ask the questions. They have to ultimately come up with the answers. Logan, your job on this show is to fake the answers. Not fake, to anticipate the answers the best that you can. On the man zone parts of it, but also how that helps the run game. Because I would imagine if you're playing zone, that means your eyes are in the backfield. Like, hey, I'm chasing this guy in man coverage. Oh crap, I was supposed to be in the D gap. It's not going to happen as often in zone. So that seems like it might potentially be a relevant plot point. But then also any strong feelings on whether you have Marshawn shadow AJ again?
I think you probably do. I think, maybe it's not as much as you did in the first game, but I think that's definitely part of it. And one of the reasons you feel comfortable about that is just because of how inefficient the passing game is. Like, it was always a little bit nervous with the Mike Adams. Yeah, like game against Tampa Bay, like, because you're like, oh, what's going on here? Like, they throw the ball a lot. They're pretty good at it. Like, ooh. So in this game, you kind of say, like, they're not great at it. They're going to take a couple of shots, but we can live with those couple of shots. You're not going to see the same kind of volume. And I do think he matches up pretty well with bigger guys. And I think he's looking like he's getting his legs under him a little bit better each week that he's healthy. And I don't think you do it all the time, but I think it's a nice changeup. And I think when you have a guy who, again, there's no such thing as a lockdown corner anymore, but a guy that has that physical skill set to match up and lets you do some different stuff to the front side of their coverage. Like, if we're going to lock the backside, you don't love it, but at least we feel better about him on AJ Brown. And we can play maybe a kind of a match zone thing to the front side where we can be a little bit more aggressive to our run fits. If it gives you that flexibility, I think you should absolutely do it. I think you'll see, and again, it'll probably be a little bit of that, be a little bit more zone. And again, I think Joe Wood at his core wants to be a man coverage blitzing team. So I think you get back to that as opposed to what you saw last week. But again, you're walking a really thin line here in terms of stopping the run, playing consistent and good coverage, and I think that's going to be really compelling. And I do think one of the things about Marshawn Lattimore that's probably underrated is his physicality when it comes to taking on receivers and taking on blocks, especially near and around the line of scrimmage. So I think that's going to be an advantage for sure. But again, mix of both. And the thing that I always have a hard time with when I'm talking defense and watching defense is I don't understand how you do both well, how you play good coverage and you play the run well. And you see, we talked about Philadelphia and how they do it straight with personnel. But schematically, like, because of your eye discipline, because of what you're looking at, because of your keys, especially in some of these more spread out formations, it becomes tough. And I think when you watch the LA game, they're in a defensive structure that is very good from a coverage standpoint, a little bit lacking from a sound run game standpoint. You don't love the matchups, and obviously you see the result, which is a 60-yard touchdown run by Saquon. So that's where I think you really got to earn your paycheck this week if you're Joe Wood Jr.
For sure. I would load the box and tell him to go for it. He's not throwing deep right now. This is a crazy stat I just scrolled down to. Hurts has targeted vertical route on just 4 of 41 passes across 2 playoff games this season. That's a 9.8% vertical target rate. His in the regular season was 15.5%. Ironically, Jared Goff was the guy who recorded the lowest vertical target rate in the NFL during the regular season. Wouldn't have guessed that. But they have so many like crossers and things that are big for them. But it was 12.2%. So it would be last in the NFL by a significant margin in terms of how often he's throwing vertical routes. So these go balls on the outside and these comebacks on the outside, he's just not throwing them as much. And he's actually faced 11. He's only faced 11 snaps of man coverage so far in the playoffs.
Oh, really?
He's 3 for 3 to Dallas Goedert with 65 yards and a touchdown. He's 0 of 8 to everyone else. So something to think about for sure. And it seems like that, whether it's coming off the concussion, whether it's the knee ankle thing that he had, he doesn't seem right. And I would probably lean into that. And if Jalen Hurts beats me, I'm going to tip my hat and say, good luck in the Super Bowl, young man. Mm-hmm. But I'm not getting beat by 26 if I can at all help it. The problem is sometimes you can't really help what 26 does.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is it's like you don't want to be like, we're not talking bad about Jalen Hurts. It's just like, it's the facts. Like, he's taken too many sacks. He's not great throwing the football right now. And so when you look at the more dangerous element of this offense, it's definitely the run game. And if you can limit it, like,
and it's also the lower risk element. I think that was the thing that like Mina and Dominique talked about on their show that was great. Was like, if most offenses to get explosive plays are everything. So it's like, well, why don't guys just throw deep all the time? Well, because it's extremely high risk. Like the success rate is low. The potential for turnovers is higher than it is on other stuff. Yeah. And so the most conservative thing you can do is just hand the ball off. And if the most conservative thing you can do in terms of downside is also your highest potential upside, that's why the Philadelphia Eagles run it 30 times a game.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. It's 100% right. And so, and again, I look at Jalen Hurts, and like he had 140 yards passing last week and took 60 yards of sacks. Like that's just not a very potent element of their offense right now. So stop the run. Stop the run. Stop Jalen as a runner. Again, he's a little bit banged up. Didn't look the same in the second half after his knee thing happened. So again, like it's more complicated than this because you do have to respect what they can do throwing the football. They have A.J. Brown. They have Devontae Smith. They have Dallas Goedert. They have explosive playmakers in the offense. You have to respect it. They just haven't accessed it very well recently. And I will say this about Nick Sirianni. He does seem to be the most narrative-driven coach in the NFL. So when he hears people saying, oh, they can't throw the football, he comes out and he's like, we're going to throw the football. You know what I mean? And
come on,
that might be a good thing.
Hey,
like
Nick.
that might
Nick,
be good.
You can't throw the football. I dare you.
But he's done that week on week. Remember they had that like little tiff where like A.J. Brown was mad and Jalen Hurts was mad. They said you can't throw the football. He comes out and they throw it like 40 times the next week. You're like, okay, that was obviously intentional. And they win football games. But it just like with his injury, with the lack of consistency, the weather, it just feels like it's a Saquon game. And if you can manage him, you give yourself a shot. And then it comes down to, Jayden Daniels, and we talked about like they've trailed for 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes in the last 4 games. That's an unreal statistic, right? 5 minutes. So if you can get them in a game flow where they have to throw, where they get out of this very comfortable hand the ball off, play good defense setup, who knows what's going to happen? So to me, like the best offense and the best defense in this game is a good offense. Let's get the offense rolling. Let's find a way to get Jayden comfortable. Hopefully, he makes a bunch of big plays. And again, this defense is amazing. It's the thing that gets me comfortable, that makes me confident in it, that they'll find a solution, is Philly does not pressure you the same way that Detroit does. I felt like there was always this looming pressure because that offense was so potent, you had to consistently score. Here, it's not like that. You can be a little bit more deliberate. And just when you find it, let's grab that thing and, take it for a bunch of points and put them in a bad spot.
For sure. And obviously the other big thing, turnovers. That's the thing that defined the Detroit game. It's something Washington has been great at outside of the Philly game. I mean, that's what killed them in that first matchup is the 2 Brian Robinson fumbles. He hadn't fumbled like all year, and then he loses 2. So redemption game for him would be enormous. And then can you continue what Sainer still and those guys have been doing on the back end? I think that would be obviously pretty good football analysis. Turnovers for your team, good. Turnovers, for your team going the other way, bad. But that definitely is something to watch for on Sunday. All right, I'll be back for the post-game show live. Who knows, Logan? It either is going to be a season wrap or we're going to the Super Bowl.
Dude, 4 quarters away, man. 4 quarters away. It feels like you're living in a dream a little bit,
It does. It does. So Sunday, 3:00 on Fox. That's where you watch it. We'll be live afterwards on YouTube and then in the feed as well, obviously on the audio side of things. And other than that, I'll see y'all on the radio 4 to 7 the next couple of days. We got great guests lined up, so very, very excited for all of that. For Logan, I'm Craig, and we'll see you next time on Take Command, a show about the Washington Commanders, who are 60 minutes away from the Super Bowl. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.